Welcome to Partnerships for Profit, the podcast where we bring you inside the world of joint ventures, strategic partnerships, and powerful collaborations. Each episode, you'll dive into conversations with top entrepreneurs, visionaries, and business leaders, unlocking the secrets to building profitable relationships that drive growth and success. Whether you're looking to expand your network, find new referral partners, or scale your business, you're in the right place. Let's get started.
On this episode of Partnership for Profits, we're joined by someone who doesn't just solve business problems, he solves people problems. Tom Hagerty is a seasoned corporate executive and now in his repurposing years, bringing decades of insights and national speakers, and author of The Business of Relationships. For over 45 years, he's been the fixer behind the scenes, helping companies get to the heart of their struggles, fractured human connection. From boardrooms to living rooms, Tom's wisdom hits home. He's been featured in national media, spoken on stages across the country, and now dedicates his time to helping leaders and teams and families rebuild trust, resolve conflict, and thrive through connection. If you've ever dealt with ghosting employees, toxic team dynamics, or even silent tension at the dinner tables, this one is for you. So let's get into it with Tom Hagerty, because every problem is a relationship problem, and those we can fix.
Dean, that introduction was, it makes me a lot more than I really am. I mean, I give you guys credit.
You were all that and more. Trust me, the people that you've helped over the years probably would agree with me more than you.
Yeah, this is a great conclusion to a week with an introduction like that. So thank you very much.
Why don't we kind of take it back? Who was Tom before he became known for the book?
Well, before I became known for the book, I think my number one job for the last 35 years now has been as a father and now a grandfather. So that's number one in my book. And before that, I was an entrepreneur. I had a couple of businesses that I founded, probably the most successful of which was the consulting firm that I had that helped people work out difficult situations in their companies. A lot of times it was finance and marketing, but there were a lot of people problems too. I mean, we got in the way of a lot of messy situations and tried to fix them. And along the way, I partnered with a couple of guys. We founded an ad agency of all things. We said we had 3 partners, a conference room, and no clients when we founded it. And about 7 years later, we had offices in 4 cities, and we had clients like Kroger Corporation, Papa John's Pizza. We introduced Tim Allen Tools to the world back when he was riding high on TV and movies. So yeah, it's been an interesting life, interesting career. As I said in my introduction, it hasn't always translated to a robust bank account. But I'm here, I'm still standing, and life is pretty good right now.
What would you say obviously, if I had to get a percentage of what you feel like most business problems boil down to, what's the percentage that it's relationship problems?
Oh, I would say that invariably it's a relationship problem. I would say 75% of them have something to do with a relationship, because you can be in financial trouble, Dean, or you can be in marketing trouble. But a lot of times the relationship is you didn't talk to your customers the right way. You didn't talk to your banker the right way. You didn't forge a relationship with a key vendor. It sounds so simple, but those things oftentimes get overlooked because people want to balance a budget. They want to meet an objective. They want to hit a date. They want to introduce a product in a certain time frame. And a lot of times the human element of that, whether it's with your employees, your customer, your vendor, your stakeholders, shareholders, whatever, you just kind of put that on the back burner and expect it to be an automatic, and it never is. And that's foundationally why I say that every problem is a relationship problem.
Yeah, it seems like the CEO mind tends to go, of course, to let me make sure the bottom line's there, which that's the short-sighted version of the long-term goal, where if I take care of everyone involved in this, we have a long-term growth. But you cut
it's interesting because I think the CEO in some ways, as a class, not as an individual or a group, but as a class, I think they get a bad rap, because one of the foundations that I had in my book, one of the reasons why I found it easy to write, if there is such a thing, is that in its base essence, a CEO is paid to have good relationships when you think about it. If you think about it in that term, a CEO, in order to have a well-functioning, profitable, growing company, simply has to have a culture that has good relationships, first with each other, employee to employee. They have to have good relationships with their vendors, with their customers, certainly, with their shareholders and stakeholders, with government regulators. And the CEO is at the top of that pyramid. So if he or she is fostering a toxic culture, regardless of size in a company, if a toxic culture, if an overly competitive culture, if a culture that rewards cutting corners, if that's the culture you are saying is okay in your company, then your relationships are going to be equally toxic with your own people and with others. And when you have a good CEO, you have a guy like Steve Jobs, or you have someone like Sheryl Sandberg or Carly Fiorina, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, on and on and on. Many of these people were very mercurial, difficult personalities, but they fostered tremendous loyalty because almost without exception, they're extremely transparent. They're extremely truthful. They have high integrity. They might be tough to work for, but the employee says, man, those years at Apple, I cherish them, or those years at Microsoft, I cherish them, or Google or Facebook or General Motors or Ford. You can go down the line and say that these people, while being tough and while having the objectives of delivering profitability, as you said, they also had an acute awareness of the value of the relationship. And that's why I found it so easy to say to my readers, these are people you ought to listen to, because they can help you foster better relationships because they get paid to do it.
So they kind of, you have an idea of what to expect, whether it comes not in the nicest words either way. You know what you're expecting with your employer versus you never know what's going on behind the sheets thing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think when you talk to employees, especially of the more recent generation, say, the 2 or 3 most recent generations of workers, they will say that transparency is extremely important to them. Work-life balance is up there somewhere. That's one of those terms that's kind of squishy. But when you talk about, really what is high value to them, they say, I want somebody who tells the truth. I want somebody that doesn't sugarcoat things. I want somebody who is transparent and honest with me. And I think if we do those kind of things, typically that company will have tremendous loyalty, and it will have lower than average retention, or lower than average attrition, rather. Higher retention. So it's something I think we all need to pay attention to it.
Yeah. Do you feel like your relationship over the years led you to diving into this book, or do you feel like kind of going through all of this over the years, you were like, let me find how some people have dealt with it, and then that started accumulating?
I think it might have been a little of both. I think the way that I say it, Dean, is that this is a book that was never really supposed to be a book. It was a sort of a circuitous journey, and I'll shorten it up for the purpose of the podcast. But it started out as a guy who loves to collect quotes. I mean, I have quotes that inspire me from business leaders, politicians, musicians, scientists, etc. You jot them down and say, man, that's inspirational. That's a neat turn of phrase. Bruce Springsteen said something, or Nelson Mandela said something, or whatever, and a bunch of business leaders. And I started to write essays about them because the first one I wrote was one from Steve Jobs when he said in the Stanford speech to the commencement speech back in 2005, he said, remembering that I'll be dead soon is one of the biggest tools I use to make major decisions. And that was post-cancer. He was cancer-free. He thought he had a runway. He didn't, obviously died in 2011. But that quote to me said, that speaks about the value of personal relationships and the perspective that you have to have for the long term, for the long run. And the decisions you make along the way are somewhat transitory, but they accumulate, over time. And anyway, so, I would write some essays or built around quotes, and I'd give them to my kids, and I'd give them to some close friends. And somebody, maybe a few somebodies over the years, said, these ought to be a newspaper column. This is really neat. You could do a newspaper column every week. And I didn't want to do a newspaper column. And so I talked to a friend of mine who writes for the business press years later, and sat down with him. And I'd had a couple of interviews with him for different things. And we had lunch one day, and I shared a couple of these with him. And he said, after a couple of days, he said, "Man, I think these are really good. I think they belong in a newspaper, and we're a fact-based business weekly. It sounds like it's a good fit. Let me pitch them to our editors." And I said, "Okay." And the editors came back some weeks later, as I recall, and said, "Hey, because we're a fact-based newspaper, because we are part of a national conglomerate, because we don't have advice columns and op-ed pieces, this doesn't fit us. But tell your friend if he had enough of these, they'd be a pretty good book." And so this thing kind of rolled itself along, and then you get in touch with a couple of publishers and say, "Well, this is going to be a fool's errand, and nobody's going to want this. And at least I can say I tried." And lo and behold, one of them got back and said, "Hey, we want to do this thing. When are you going to have the rest of it done?" And a very casual, sort of relaxed, right when you feel like it and when you have a neat quote, became, I better do something about this.
How long did it take you after you were like, green light, go get it done?
The green light go, I had shipped off about, of the 52 essays I have in the book, I think I shipped off 20 of them and maybe the beginning of an introductory chapter. And when they said green light go, it was like October of 2022, I believe. And I had it done in 3 months. I submitted the completed manuscript to them January 6th of 2023. And then you go through the year of edits and yada, 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 and all that. But so I like to say that, I wrote about a third of the book in 8 years and 2/3 of it in 3 months.
That's great. Did you find it easier to stay in that mind frame once you kind of like, okay, I can start and stay focused on this versus the just accumulating over the years?
Yeah, I really did. I think that
because obviously it was a passion by that point that you enjoyed already.
I had the benefit of having collected the quotes, so I didn't really need to find the quote itself. I needed to do some research about the person, because if you've seen the book and glanced through it, you'll see that, for anybody with a passing interest in business, there are people there that are very recognizable. I mentioned some of them. I mean, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Jack Welch from GE, Carly Fiorina, Sheryl Sandberg from Google and Facebook, and others. So you probably got, let's say, 20 or 25 CEOs in there that you'd say, I've heard of them. I know who that is. Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, some of the old heroes too. And then the others, you really have to set it up even for a person who's involved in business, because if I said Anita Roddick to you, would you know who she was? Would you know who Nito Kubin is? Would you know, so on and on and on. There's oftentimes interesting life stories. And that's the way I try to set up the essay, is a little bit of biography. What is this person's credibility? Why is it worth listening to them? And then talk in terms of how this quote can apply to your personal relationship. What context was the quote said in or written in case of a shareholder letter? What context was it done in? And what context can we bend it to help us, foster some of the 12 qualities of great personal relationships?
Do you feel like as you kind of started going back through them and getting more detail on the human being and what the context of was when they were giving that quote, did it shift your perspective on the quotes from when you originally, because, when we get them ourselves, we're like, oh man, that's perfect for, but without context, there's not really
Yeah, I think that is a great point. Context is a great point. And I found myself going back to a saying that I heard many, many years ago from somebody, and I always thought it was a good turn of phrase. And the saying is that saints have a past and sinners have a future. A lot of these CEOs don't have clean hands. They've got multiple marriages, fraught relationships with kids. They were strike breakers in the case of some of the old folks like, Henry Ford and that. Some of them came through difficult personal situations. Some landed in jail, so they're not pristine. They're not people that you would say, I want my son or daughter to grow up exactly like Henry Ford, or exactly like Bill Gates, but, in the context of business, they all did great things. And so to your point about the context, when you do a little research into the life story and you try to build a little bio so that somebody is familiar with this, I didn't shade those rough edges, but there are some people that had some pretty sharp elbows.
Well, and that's good to know. It gives you perspective on why they brought it to the table, but it could also shift your mind frame around the phrase where it might mean more to you. And that was more of my curious. Like, did you find one or two of the sayings that you've used over time that meant something to you that once you got the context from the human, you were like, huh, that hits me different now. Like, I have a perspective change there.
Yeah. I'll give you a for instance, because it's a guy that I worked under. Let's put it that way. I was several levels removed from him, but Jack Welch was at GE as the chairman and CEO for a couple of decades, tripled shareholder value, made 200 acquisitions, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And he was a tough guy. He was an absolute tough guy, but he was also the executive of the century, according to, the business
Times
press.
or was,
So Jack Welch said something in a speech to his business leaders, the guys who headed up GE Aircraft Engines, GE Medical, GE Finance, all the big parts of the business, 8 or 9 parts of the business. And he said this to them in a speech in New York. He said, if you are not number 1 or number 2 in your marketplace, I will fix you, close you, or sell you. So change before you have to. Now, I was at Aircraft Engines when Jack was a new CEO, and we just thought he walked on water. I mean, and I got to meet him once, one of these handshake events. But that quote struck me as a mantra when I was at GE. I mean, he said it while I was there. Everybody knew the speech.
And it was celebrity then. He was celebrity status for you at that point.
But you reflect back on that years later, and you say, change before you have to. Those simple 5 words. In the context of a relationship, change before you have to the financial irresponsibility that threatens to wreck your family. Change before you have to the passive aggressive nature that is creating a terrible relationship with your kids. Change before you have to the bad temper with your wife. Change before you have to the budding addiction. There's a lot of change before you have to's in our lives. And you say, those simple 5 words, that was powerful to me years later to think how that could apply to a relationship.
Yeah, because it just dives right into self-awareness, which of course, the more you can grow yourself, it's all self-development.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
That's huge.
I have said before that the book that I wrote, a lot of times I get asked the question, who is this for? And I think my number one most frequent answer to people who ask that, friends, interviewers like yourself, whatever, is it's for people who aren't afraid to look in the mirror.
That's hard for people, man.
Because when I say that relationships, every problem is a relationship problem. If you're going to fix that problem, a lot of times, and this is true in business as well, you've got to be able to look in the mirror and say, what's my role in this?
Right.
I think the recovery community has an expression of keeping your side of the street clean is what they call, so
yeah.
I think there's a lot of wisdom there in terms of looking in the mirror, being self-aware enough, and being willing to employ strategies, whether they're mine or anyone else's, but I mean,
Sure.
employing strategies that will give you a better perspective, build your integrity, enhance your sense of trustworthiness, and even some of the softer skills that are necessary, and enhance your humility. We're not the center of everything. I mean, at some point, you got to recognize that it doesn't mean you're less than, but it means you think less often of yourself. So let's be a little more humble. Let's be way more resilient. Let's quit being so soft and be a little more resilient. The first option is not exiting a relationship.
Right.
It's working at it. So,
and I think you're right within the you were saying eras. For the generations, the one I would say younger than me, and then one right after that, and I feel like it's kind of shifting again. But there's a generation in between there where it was, if this isn't for you, just get out. Instead of let's see, because the development of you going through this hard time is what creates you to be a better person. But if you're not willing to go through it, you just go back to the next.
Yeah. I had a business leader say to me not long ago, and this was priceless to me anyway. I'm a quote lover, so guilty as charged. But he said, I remember a time when resumes were short and careers were long, and now it's exactly the opposite. And all the things about bare minimum Mondays, workplace ghosting, quiet quitting, the great resentment, on and on and on. All of this is very, very recent. I would challenge you to say, think back 15 years. Was there anything like this? And where did it? How did we get here?
It's an interesting thing. I think, and sadly enough, I tend to go back to our two-party system and the political world that we tend to, inch into, that ends up being the let's just keep playing these guys against each other. And I feel like that kind of became a generational thing as well, was like, oh, we can just, push some blame somewhere versus the mirror.
Well, that was one of the eye openers for me, because in and around the book, it wasn't part of the book. It wasn't my intention to ever make it a part of the book. But in and around all of this, you begin to become more aware of the status of relationships in general, and it's an $8 trillion problem in business, but it's even a bigger problem when you look at it in terms of the personal toll that it's taking. And right now in America, we have 68% of our people, over 2/3 of us, are saying, I fundamentally don't trust other people. And that's not Tom Hagerty saying that, or some internet meme post, saying that. That's the Pew Research Center saying that, it is almost, increased by 1/3 since the 1970s. I mean, we were never terrifically trusting, but usually 50% or more of us said, I basically trust other people. Now it's 68% of us say, I fundamentally don't trust other people. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. You spoke to one of them, the political polarization. I think we've got, economic inequality plays a part in that. We just don't trust the classes above us or whatever. And I think there's a general, call it a decline in reliability. There's a perception of that even my neighbor, my friend, my sibling, my parent, my child, they're saying things that they're going to do and they never do them. They never deliver, so there's that undercurrent of a lack of reliability.
I feel like a lot of, for me anyway, the book leads back to that self-development, because all of these things are giving you a perspective of someone in a place they were at, but it also is a look at yourself and see how this affects you, and what it recommends to you in the way of applying it to yourself.
I couldn't have said it better. I think that's the intention of it. When I began to look at this and say, not just whether the quote was relevant, but how would it fit? What quality does it speak of? And when I started to do a lot more research, like I said, in the later stages of putting the book together, you start looking at, well, what does the Harvard Business Review say about, the qualities that are necessary in good relationships? What does, certain medical journals say? What does websites that are credible say? What does news outlets say? And they all seem to gravitate in and around what I came up to be 12 fundamental qualities of good relationships. And I mentioned a few of them before, with perspective and honesty and integrity and trust and resilience and risk and change and commitment and priority and those. And basically, again, it wasn't me saying it, but it was so foundational that you say, if I want to have a good relationship with a spouse, a sibling, a child, a parent, a friend, a golf partner, a business associate, a neighbor, these are things that I have to be about, and it became sort of an exercise for me to say, how can I use these business leaders and bend their quotes in a way that might be instructive? And I really tried in each essay. At the end of it, there is a little couple of sentences called One Thought that says, if I completely bored you for 9 paragraphs of stuff, then if you carry this one thought away, it's this one sentence that distills the lesson, or 2 sentences that distill the lesson. But the big one for me was one action. Just do one thing. And here it is. Here's my suggestion. If you want to take this essay and do something about it, we all consume a lot of information, but what do we do with it? If you want to do something with it, here's one action you could take, and a lot of them are make a list, make a phone call, make a pact with yourself, write down something that you don't want to forget and carry it with you, the simple stuff. But hopefully it's instructive for the reader, and hopefully, they look back and say, you know what? I was always a pretty trustworthy guy, but man, I sucked at risk, and I really was terrible at resilience. And now I'm a little better at both,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I had seen one of because I was glancing through on Amazon too, of some of just reviews and things like that. And one of the guys on there said, I was looking for just some quotes. And while I found some great quotes, I found more stuff that just made me have to go sit and contemplate more than anything else. And I was like, that's great. Like, I love that, because
Yeah.
I mean, you think of books like the Bible, and you take a quote and then you sit on that quote for a while trying to, get this idea of what does that mean to you, when this is obviously written much longer than yours is more recent, but you're trying to find this meaning that applies to you. And to me, like, that's such a good piece of a book, because you can always go back and reread it in a different part of your life, and this means something else.
Well, truth be told, and you mentioned the Bible, so I'll tell on myself on this one. There is a person who gave me a book review, who I played football with in college, and we were both cut-ups and goofballs and you name it, and then we went on into business. I hadn't had any contact with him for probably 20 years, didn't even know that he knew that I wrote a book, but he left a review that said, better than the Bible. And I wanted to call him up, and one of these days I still will, but I'll say, what in the hell were you thinking about?
You should just send him an autographed book.
Yeah.
Yep. Tom Hagerty / Jesus.
Yes, there you go.
Just to mess with him. Before I let you go, because I know we're getting to our time frame, but I wanted to get, because you had mentioned, obviously, being now the main key for you was father and grandfather, which is huge, because to me, when I got a dog, I learned a lot about myself. When I had a kid, that was my mirror that showed me everything that you thought you were doing right, but it's going to come back at you, and you're like, that was me. Okay. What she just did was me, so I cannot be mad at her for that. Do you feel like you brought what you learned from being a father and grandfather into the book, or some of what the book brought from you did you apply more to your father and grandfather now?
I'm not a cop-out, but I would say a little of both.
That's fair.
There was certainly a lot of introspection on my part as to, some of the reflections in the essays about, if you said this to your daughter, I could have said, I said this to my daughter. The editor didn't want it that way, but, I could have easily said that.
Yeah.
So I learned lessons along the way. And I think now that the book is written and I can say it's out there in the public and so forth and so on, I look back at that and say, now I'm a better father or a better grandfather. My kids are grown now. I have children who are almost 37, 34, and 33. So they're launched. Two of them live in different cities. They're all very successful, both personally and professionally. But I find that our dialogue as father to daughter, father to sons, is much more significant than it might have been if I hadn't been reflective like this and had the opportunity to communicate this way.
That's great. Well, thank you for coming to hang out with me today.
Yeah.
End up in your Friday. Everyone, if you have not, you can go to Amazon and find the Business of Relationships, and any other places they can find you.
Barnes and Noble. It's in some bookstores. It's available on Google Play, Apple Play. The electronic versions of it. So yep.
And what about you, Tom? Where can we find you if we want to just go follow along this journey of yours?
Well, I'm in the process of developing a website. It's going to be thetomhagerty.com, and I hope to have weekly doses of wisdom on there that will come from business, but may also come from the music industry, an odd politician who actually says something wise every once in a while. Maybe he makes the cut. Don't know, but
might have been a mistake, but we'll take it.
Yeah. You're a complete buffoon, but you said something once and got lucky. Yeah. But no, that's where you can find me right now. LinkedIn, Facebook, all of that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for hanging out with me,
Dean. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. And
you're in one of the greatest cities in the United States. So
New Orleans is a rock, man. I always tell people when you get off the plane here, it's just like you get whacked by like culture and humidity. So you get to sweat and feel really cool.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank y'all for hanging out as well. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Partnerships for Profit. We hope you've gained valuable insights on how to form profitable partnerships and take your business to the next level. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. Got a partnership story to share or someone you'd like to see featured on the show? Reach out to us. Until next time, keep building those partnerships for profit.